Good afternoon. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along today. A special program today. I'm expecting a guest to pop in to do a great conversation about the life and work of Randall Robinson. But if that does not materialize, we've got an exciting proposition for you and for us anyway. What we haven't done in a long, long time is taken questions from our audience. And I'm wondering if there are those listening here on KFAI that want to weigh in on some of the pressing issues of the day. And if you do, I'm going to ask the station if they would be able to field some phone calls and bring you into the conversation. Great to get feedback. Great to have you involved in the show. And I'm going to be sharing the studio number momentarily. And if in the course of this program you want to weigh in, respond to the things I'll be sharing, and or bring up your own ideas, glad to have the conversation, something we haven't done for a while. And let's make this talk radio, talk digital as well. And so, you know what? As always, I want to invite you to support this program, support the live stream in particular by tuning us in at YouTube Insight channel. In fact, I'd like you to go there and subscribe, be a subscriber. I guess I found out now that we can't take phone calls today, so that's off the table again. But we want you to subscribe. Join the program, support the program by subscribing and telling your friends, telling others that they can support us here by becoming a subscriber at the Insight YouTube channel. You may be watching the program on YouTube, Insight News. You could be watching on the NPA, Black Press USA YouTube channel. Or many of you connect with us through Facebook, through LinkedIn, and through Twitter. However you are connected, we want you to take a minute today, if you can, and go over to the YouTube Facebook channel and subscribe, the YouTube Insight News channel, Insight News on YouTube, and subscribe to this program, to the channel. Well, listen, let's just go over a couple of articles that have been top of mind for us at Insight News and for us in the community. Among them, among them is a story on the city now having to pay out another $8.9 million over Derek Chauvin's actions. And these are actions he committed before the murder of George Floyd. This is from an article by Associated Press. Jim Salter wrote the article. And the article says that the city of Minneapolis agreed to last Thursday to pay nearly $9 million to settle lawsuits filed by two people who said former police officer Derek Chauvin pressed his knee into their necks years before he used the same move to kill George Floyd. John Pope Jr. is going to get $7.5 million, and Zoya Code is going to get $1.375 million. The settlements were announced during a meeting of the Minneapolis City Council. Both lawsuits stemmed from arrests in 2017, 3 years before Chauvin killed Floyd, during an arrest captured on video that sparked protests worldwide, prompted a national reckoning on racial injustice, and compelled a Minneapolis Police Department overhaul. At a news conference last Thursday, Mayor Jacob Fry apologized to all the victims of Chauvin and said that if police supervisors had done the right thing, George Floyd would not have been murdered. Open quote, he should have been fired in 2017. He should have been held accountable in 2017, close quote. That's what Frey told reporters. Both lawsuits named Chauvin and several other officers. The lawsuits allege police misconduct, excessive force, and racism. Pope and Code are Black. Chauvin is white. They also said the city knew that Chauvin had a record of misconduct, but didn't stop him. Criminal charges in both cases were eventually dropped, but Chauvin is in prison for Floyd's murder. Bob Bennett, an attorney for Pope and Code, noticed that other officers failed to intervene or report Chauvin, and police leaders allowed Chauvin to keep working even though they had video evidence from body cameras of his wrongdoing. He said the video is expected to be released soon. The easy thing is to blame Chauvin for everything, Bennett said in a written statement. But the important thing is that the video shows is that none of those those 9 to a dozen officers at the scene ever reported it, ever tried to stop it. They violated their own policy and really any sense of humanity. Police Chief Brian O'Hara said the department is forced to reckon once again with the deplorable acts of someone who has proven to be a national embarrassment. But he also cited systemic failure within the police department. The chief said, "I'm appalled at the repetitive behavior of this coward and disgusted by the inaction and acceptance of that behavior by members of this department. Such conduct is a disgrace to the badge and an embarrassment to what is truly a very noble profession." Code, who has a history of homelessness and mental health problems, was arrested in June 2017 after she tried to strangle her mother with an extension cord. Pope was 14 in 2017 when, according to his lawsuit, Chauvin subjected him to excessive force while responding to a domestic assault report. City Council member Elliot Payne said he hoped the settlements bring some closure to this era and is a stark reminder of the work we have lying ahead. The lawsuits said body camera recordings showed Chauvin used many of the same tactics on Pope and Code that he used on Floyd. Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison on a state murder charge in 2021 for killing Floyd by pressing his knee to Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes as Floyd pleaded that he couldn't breathe. The city eventually paid $27 million to Floyd's family. Code's lawsuit said that she was in handcuffs when Chauvin slammed her head to the ground and pinned his knee on the back of her neck for 4 minutes and 41 seconds. A second officer didn't intervene, and a responding police sergeant approved the force, the lawsuit said. Pope's lawsuit said that the mother was drunk when she called police because she was upset that Pope and his 16-year-old sister left their cell phone chargers plugged in, leading to a physical confrontation. It alleged Chauvin struck Pope in the head with a large metal flashlight at least 4 times. It said he then put Pope in a chokehold before pinning Pope to the floor and putting his knee on Pope's neck. Chauvin would proceed to hold Pope in this prone position for more than 15 minutes. All the while, Pope was completely subdued and not resisting. The complaint alleges. Over those minutes, Pope repeatedly cried out that he could not breathe. The complaint goes on to allege that at least 8 other officers did nothing to intervene. It said Chauvin did not mention in his report that he had hit Pope with his flashlight, nor did he mention pinning Pope for so long. Chauvin's sergeant reviewed and approved his report and use of force, despite having firsthand knowledge that the report was false and misleading, the lawsuit alleged. So Chauvin admitted to many of Pope's allegations when he pleaded guilty in 2021 to federal charges for violating civil rights of both Floyd and Pope. He was sentenced in July to 21 years on those charges, and he's serving his sentences in a federal prison in Arizona. Boy, well, I think that's the right description of this. It's an embarrassment, and it's time for the city, for all of us to look at this question of accountability. Why didn't other officers intervene? So what is there in terms of police culture that allows people to do this horrific activity with the sense of impunity. Uh, if you're listening or watching, have a comment to make, go to the comment section on any of our live stream channels and send me a note. Michelle, I see you're here. Michelle Madison, thank you for watching as you always do, and then invite other people to join the program, leave their comment to create this conversation. What do you think? What do you think? Uh, you know, uh, and like over the past week, I think the community is stunned, being stunned again and again by the violence in Alabama. Apparently, 4 young people killed and 16 more wounded at a Sweet 16 party. And the question is about the availability of guns in our community, and what are we going to do about that? And there have been other incidents going on now as well. Well, here's a note. It says that the I'm looking at my notes on the 4. And what surprises me is that so far, it seems that they have not been able to identify the assailant. And my sense is, how do you show up somewhere and kill 4 people and shoot 16 others, and nobody knows who you are or where you are, and they can't find you? Particularly when they were saying that this town is a very small town, a town of around 3,000 people, a town where truly everybody knows everybody else. So I'm concerned about that. And again, if you have got comments or thoughts or on the question of this rampant violence in the community and the question of police community relations, drop a note into the text. Love to have your comments on that. I'm going to go to another item now. And what's new and newsworthy is that the city of Minneapolis has okayed a dawn Muslim prayer call. And this is the first for a big city in the U.S. And there's an image I have for you who are seeing this on social media. It's Abu Bakr as-Sadiq Islamic Center. A member of the Abu Bakr as-Sadiq Islamic Center is reciting the Islamic call to prayer, or Adhan, on Thursday, May 12th, 2022 in Minneapolis. That's the photograph. The Adhan exhorts men to go to the closest mosque 5 times a day for prayer, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Abu Bakr, which hosts some 1,000 men for Friday midday prayers, plans to hold meetings with neighbors before publicly be broadcasting the call this summer. This is a picture that is by a photographer, Jesse Wardarski. Well, the Associated Press story says that Minneapolis will allow broadcast of the Muslim call to prayer at all hours, becoming the first major U.S. city to allow the announcement, or Adhan, to be heard over speakers 5 times a day year-round. And that's interesting to me because our office is around the corner from Masjid and Noor, which is at 17th and Lindale in North Minneapolis. So I have not had the fortune yet of being in office while the prayers were while the call was being broadcast, but I hope to be there. And to me, it just reminds me of how there's something comforting when I hear church bells throughout the summer announcing time, and they become part of the DNA of your audio experience and community. And I'm feeling that I'm going to feel the same way, a feeling of peace and a feeling of connection when I am able to hear the Muslim call for prayer coming out of Masjid and Noor 5 times a day. I think it's a wonderful thing. Well, the story goes on to say that the Minneapolis City Council unanimously agreed last Thursday to amend the city's noise ordinance to which have prevented dawn and late evening calls at certain times of the year due to noise restrictions. That's what the Star Tribune reported. But this vote came during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The story says the Constitution doesn't sleep at night. That's a good quote, says Jailani Hussein, executive director of the Minnesota chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations after the vote. He said that the action in Minneapolis shows the world that a nation founded on freedom of religion makes good on its promise. Minneapolis has had a flourishing population of East African immigrants since at least the 1990s, and mosques are now common. 3 of 13 members of the council, that's Minneapolis City Council, identify as Muslim. The decision drew no organized community opposition, and Mayor Jacob Fry is expected to sign the measure. Minneapolis has become a city for all religions, said Imam Muhammad Dukuli of Masjid and Nur Mosque in Minneapolis, who was among several Muslim leaders who witnessed the vote. 3 years ago, city officials worked out with Dar al-Hijra Mosque to allow the Adhan to be broadcast outdoors 5 times daily during Ramadan. Prayers are said when light appears at dawn, at noon, at mid to late afternoon, at sunset, and when the night sky appears. In Minnesota, dawn arrives as early as before 5:30 a.m. in the summer, and sunset, however, at the solstice happens after 9 p.m. The city did allow year-round broadcast last year, but only between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., typically excluding the early morning prayer and sometimes the night prayer. At a recent public hearing, Christian and Jewish leaders expressed support for extending the hours for Adhan. Councilmember Lisa Goodman, who on Thursday was observing the final day of Passover, said the Jewish call to prayer, which is generally spoken rather than broadcast, doesn't face legal restrictions. Observers at church bells regularly toll for Christians. It's something I grew up with, but not my children, said Councilmember Jamal Osman, adding that hearing the call to prayer from local mosques brings him joy. Well, that's interesting. So again, I'd love to know how you feel if you are hearing the bells, hearing the calls to prayer. It would be interesting to get a sense of what your take is on that. Back to Michelle. Her comment regarding the previous story. She said someone definitely knew who committed that heinous crime on the 16th birthday party. The problem is that people are afraid to speak up. They're saying that snitches get stitches. Unfortunately, that's the mindset of many people. Shout out to Patrick White Sr. Patrick, thanks for checking out the show and your note. And to anybody else that's watching or listening, we'd love to have your comments, your feedback on the Derek Chauvin story, on the story we just read about the Muslim call to prayer. And I'm going to share another story that I think is an important one, particularly in Minnesota, because we have such a diverse population here. This is a story that will appear in next Monday's Inside News. It's one that comes out of the Afro-Latino Project, or Afro-Latin Project. And the article is headlined that the U.S. Census Hispanic race change debate is a reversal of 10 years of progress for U.S. Black Latinxers. This is a story by Amilcar Priestley. Amilcar Priestley is the director of the Afro-Latino Project based in New York. And as soon as I get it situated here, I'm going to share this story. The story was first published in March of this year, March 9th, 2023, by a project called the Afro-Latino Festival. And and we're printing it in Insight with permission. So the article says that in the past 10 years, Black social movements in Latin America have made progress entering the political space, a testament to their decades of social and political activism. The 2018 inauguration of F.C. Campbell as Vice President of Costa Rica, the 2022 inauguration of Francia Marquez Mina as Vice President of Colombia, the recent cabinet appointments of the new administration of Brazil's President Lula all reflect the social and political progress of Afro-Latins in Latin America. Similarly, Latin American nations have started to embrace demographic recognition of Black populations, as in Mexico's 2020 census, where 2.5 million self-identified Afro-Mexicans were counted. And in Panama, in 2023, the census indicated that 1.4 million self-identified as Afro-descendants. So given such heightened visibility of the Black presence in Latin American countries, it's ironic that the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, the agency responsible for the census design, recently proposed a drastic shift in the census. They seek to change Latino/Hispanic from an ethnic category to a quote unquote racial category for the 2030 census. And that is causing a stir. The article goes on to say that doing so will effectively reverse the progress made by Black, Latino, Latina, Latinx community in the United States for recognition. The data says we exist. A 2022 study by the Pew Center for Research noted that approximately 25% of Latino, Latina, Latinx self-identified as Afro-Latin, and among those, 1/3 identified as Black, effectively 4 to 6 million self-identified as Afro-Latinos or Afro-Latins in the US. The article goes on to say that given these facts, advocates for the Afro-Latinx identity believe that changing the U.S. Census categories will severely hamper further opportunities for the Afro-Latinx community to be recognized and counted. The racial and ethnic identities of those in Latin America, and by default, those descended from the region, are not monolithic. Similarly, terms Hispanic and Latino, while themselves are U.S. ethnic constructs, they do actually describe a multiracial and oops, I lost my page here. Okay, 1 second here. I'm navigating my reading in my screen here, so. It's a little difficult, but bear with me. The racial and ethnic identities of those in Latin America, and by default, those descended from the region, are not monolithic. Oops. And I'm switching it again. Hold on. So I'm navigating between two screens on my computer to bring this story to you, and I lost one, and I'm trying to get this one back again. Okay, the racial and ethnic identities of those in Latin America, and by default, those descended from the region, are not monolithic. Similarly, the terms Hispanic and Latino, while themselves are U.S. ethnic constructs, they do actually describe a multiracial and multi-ethnic grouping that includes Afro-descendants, indigenous, mixed race, mestizos, whites, Asian, and Middle Eastern. So it's a broad encompassing term. There's a map here that shows ethnicity by group or race in the U.S. that's pretty interesting that you'll want to check out. The article continues that, ironically, the U.S. Census Office, while seeking to aggregate the Latino category, is simultaneously proposing to make North African and Middle Eastern its own category separate from white. This disaggregation into separate category will raise this group's statistical and demographic visibility, an effort long sought by many of that community. In fact, every proposal under consideration by OMB now is asking for a disaggregation of data. However, the only one not being considered for disaggregation is the Latino proposal. The change OMB proposes is one that will homogenize Latinos, Latinx, Hispanics into one undifferentiated pool. And OMB's decision to condense race and ethnicity into one thing is being presented as a way to simplify the racial and ethnic questions on the census, which they claim have confused Latinos for some time. They suggest it's also a way to reduce undercounting by those who check the other category. This article, written by Amilcar Priestley and the people at the Afro-Latino Project, goes on to say, we disagree. We disagree that there are many who strongly opposed this census change, including the Coalition of Black Latinx Organizations. And he lists those with the link. This coalition states unequivocally that Latino Hispanic is not a race, and that's his emphasis. So what's the fight against becoming a race? The article says the Afro-Latino Project joins in opposition to these proposed changes for several reasons. One, in one fell swoop, Afro-Latins will lose hard-fought gains in statistical visibility, including the 2022 Pew Center results of 25% as we near the end of the United Nations International Decade for Afro-Descendants. This change by the U.S. is the exact opposite of what the UN's international commitment intended. Number two, it undermines disaggregation of health, economic, legal, and social disparities based on race within the Latino community, and it masks historical and racial prejudices. Let me take a break here and just check to make sure that we have feedback from people here that want to weigh in on this question. So, number four, it says, in attempting to shift the foundational reality for how race and ethnicity exist simultaneously in Latin communities, because Afro-Latinos are both African and Latino, the OMB unwittingly facilitates the continued invisibilization, that's a good word, or, for example, erasure of Black Latinos. And that's what was the experience of Blacks in Latin America and continues in the US today. Disparate treatment based on race has and continues to be an underreported but very critical issue in Latin America and has been transplanted to the US. That is why maintaining our Afro-descendant identity as an ethnic group who is also racialized is critical. Making Hispanics into one race gives the appearance that Latinxes are all the same, but we are not. So despite the purported confusion about ethnicity in the US, the majority mestizo Latino Latin American agenda has always intentionally sought to hide ethnic distinctions, especially those that were not Eurocentric or that rejected Eurocentricity in what they claim was and is in the interest of nation building and identity formation. Interesting. He goes on to say the Latin American desire is to impose a pan-ethnic crisol de razas under the false guise of an imaginary racially democratic society, that is a deception. Thus, Amilcar writes, the OMB's proposed changes actually facilitate the very racist invisibilization of that Black Latinxes have fought against, which is historical and contemporarily repeated and systematic attempt to otherize Black identity in the Latino context. The goal for increased political representation of Latinos, while of great importance, cannot come at the expense of 25% of Latinos who've already been marginalized by non-Black Latinos who navigate America with white skin privilege. We, as African Latinos, summarily reject the proposed changes that will do nothing more than serve as a continuation of status quo, and that's keeping Black Latinos hidden. Whatever changes occur in the U.S. Census, they should not be changes that abandon and undermine the United States' own obligations as a signatory to the United Nations International Decade of Afro-Descendants. They should be consistent with the UN declaration that states in proclaiming this decade, the international community is recognizing that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. Around 200 million people identifying themselves as being of African descent live in the Americas. Many millions more live in other parts of the world outside of the African continent. So what's the call to action? The proposal is for this change to transform Hispanic into a race that's currently open for public commentary at the Office of Management and Budget. And I think that commentary is either current or maybe expired already, but it's probably never too late to weigh in if you have feelings of something. The author says that we Afro-Latinos offer this alternative solution: maintain the two-part question design, and then bring all members of the Hispanic Latinx communities, especially Afro-Latinos and indigenous groups, to the table, and don't wait to invite us posthumously after the deed is done. While we wait for the opportunity to share our knowledge about Afro-Latino experience with the Office of Management and Budget, we ask everyone to protest the change by sending letters to or calling the Office of Management and Budget or reacting on the organization's website. Finally, Amilcar Priestley says, raising the Afro-Latino voices now may be our own chance to be heard and recognized in the way we consider important and respectful. So, long article. It's going to be in Insight News this week, Monday coming up. It's important, and love to have you check in on it, weigh it, and comment on it. So we've got love to have you all weigh in on the conversation. I think what I want to do now is, in the context of this question of identity and the challenge of the Afro-Latino community, kind of hits me personally, and I want to share that with you. And again, I invite your feedback as well. The sharing comes from this. I've said often that my own roots are Afro-Cuban. My father is a Cuban born. His father is Jamaican. Their family moved from Jamaica to Cuba at the turn of the century, the 1900s or so. And that's where my father and his sisters and brothers were all born, except for the youngest of the group of 6. So he grew up Cuban, speaking Spanish, but also aware of his Jamaican heritage, also aware of his African heritage. The family moved back to Jamaica after maybe 15, 20 years living in Cuba because life was hard for them. They were farmers. They were cane farmers. So my father came here from Jamaica and married my mom, who was a Southern African-American woman in Kansas City. So my father was working on a victory farm. What's that? This country brought immigrant workers, farm workers, to work on produce farms throughout the Midwest and the South when the American soldiers were at war during World War II. That's how my dad got here. He was the first out of our village to come, but after him, many, many others came to broaden the beachhead he created in the first wave when he moved to Kansas City. And our Jamaican community there grew because of that. Well, what does it mean? It means that growing up as a kid, I became aware of two things. One, I know uh, as a Black person what that means, what you're born into, but I also know the nuance, and the nuance is interesting. Um, I would watch because my father had an accent, and it could switch between a Jamaican British accent, could be Spanish accent from time to time, Cuban accent, but an accent nonetheless. And I watched the difference accorded my father and my mother, particularly by white people, or at least on one occasion that I probably have overgeneralized, by a white police officer. Story is that on an afternoon, a Sunday afternoon at the park across the street from my house, my mom and dad, both young and both athletic, were having a race. Well, a race on a Sunday afternoon looked like my dad was chasing my mom. She was just winning the race, but it caught the attention of a law enforcement person, pulled them up, stopped. He listened to them, but the minute he recognized that my father was not an American born Black, his attitude toward him changed. So this country has an experience of, in my view, and from that 5-year old understanding, according my mother, the native born African American, American born African, one level
Hi, all. So we're actually having a bit of a technical issue. Miss Al's audio went out, which is totally fine. Let me introduce myself. My name is Yasmin. I am the producer of the conversation with Al McFarlane, and I hope you guys are enjoying um, a little bit of history of Al McFarlane and his family, and as it relates to the Afro Latino experience. I think he's back, so let's hopefully he is. But I think I his audio is actually still out. So we're going to do today is we're actually going to do a little bit of a recap, and kind of bring in some past previous episodes. And while he gets his audio back and gets everything else resituated, let's do this. Let's actually pull up a we have a episode which we did. I believe it was about a couple of weeks ago, actually last week in March, where we talked about $800 billion for reparation for Black Californians. We also had Miss Cesar there talking. So let's actually listen to this and kind of just let's reminisce a little bit.
how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And thank you for those beautiful words. I
Well,
appreciate it.
always good to be with you. I'm inspired by you and your family, your work, your vision, and the consistency, the persistence that you bring, the uh, the dedication you have to elevating knowledge about who we are and what we stand for in the world, and the power that we have to shape futures that reflect our dignity and our possibilities, that allow them to continue to materialize, to self actualize. I think that's kind of the intent as I see you and your work with Black Ink, in Black Ink, and other arenas like the Sankofa series, always elevating and motivating. So respond to that. You know, am I describing you in any way that is close to being right?
Well, I appreciate all of the beautiful words and the description. I am likewise inspired by your work for all these years in holding up the, I don't know, just holding up the idea and ideals of Black people having their own resources to actually promote their own stories, whether it be current events or events that's happening nationally, internationally, locally. I really appreciate all the work you've done over these years. It's been inspiring to watch, and I feel like my work is just to help be a small part of what you and others like you have already built. So, yeah, I really appreciate it.
So talk about In Black Ink. What's the organization? What's the mission? What's been the history so far? And what's the work ahead? And in the course of this conversation, please talk about these important events that are coming up real soon here in Twin Cities.
Of course, of course. Well, In Black King was not my vision.
Okay, so it looks like we're still having a bit of issues, so we're going to keep going. Um, and I hope you guys are enjoying this interview. I think the beauty of Insight News and the conversation with Al McFarlane is that he is able to bring a collective of just amazing scholars, comedians, community activists, and people who have made up a community in the Twin Cities and beyond, and really, really kind of sharing the needs of our community and kind of informing the way that we should be thinking about the world and looking at the world. So I'm hoping that, we come on every day, Monday through Friday from, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And we have an amazing community that comes in and supports us and stuff. And we just want you to continue coming and supporting us, because I believe that what the message that we're putting out there, related to the African American community, related to the community in the African diaspora, to the Afro Latino community, to just our community in general, is so important. And we want you guys to continue to support us, continue to email us and message us and let us know what are the things that are important to you. What are the things that you want to hear about? Mr. Al has an amazing platform, and I think he's back. Are you back, Mr.
Can you
Al?
hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you
Oh,
perfectly.
great.
So we're back.
Great, great. Well,
So
Yasmin, thank you for jumping in there, and thank you for being ready to make things happen.
no problem.
We're using StreamYard. That's a great platform, and I'm not sure if my microphone
Right.
failed me, but I switched microphones and switched. So we'll keep
It's
going.
totally fine. This is live, and this is how we work. Michelle Madison, I just want to make a comment. She mentioned that is so interesting hearing about the McFarlane history. So, Miss Al, why don't you continue and
Yeah.
talk about
Well,
the love story of your parents? Like, tell us about that.
well, I could, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about, but their story, how it leads to actually me being in the news business. That's what
Oh,
I was
okay.
coming to, and I was coming to the question of what the story that I just read about Amilcar Priestley was about, and that's a question of identity and why it's important and why it's personal to me, because I come to this having claimed uh, a a space inside the Latino culture as I call myself medio cubano. De vez en cuando presentar mi programa en español. Puedo hablar español. I can speak Spanish. I'm not perfect, but I'm pretty good. And
Right.
I love to use the language when I can. And what captures my imagination, Yasmin, is that many, 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 many more of us are speaking Spanish and speaking Portuguese and speaking French.
Right.
And that one of the problems of the particular and unique American subjugation of the identity and the will, the experience, the lens of
Right.
Black Americans is this intent to keep people clamped down, so that you think that the whole world is the box that you're in. Uh, and that brings another thought to mind. Like, when I was a kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, my mom and dad would say, you can go to the alley to 1 block down this way. Don't cross any street. Don't cross the alley. And that was my whole world, my block, my neighborhood, right?
Right.
And what's I've come to realize is that command of authority,
Right.
while it's useful for a 5-year-old, it disserves a people. And as a people, as often as not, part of our experience here has been this oppressive idea that we are limited and that we have no agency, no power. And so therefore we suffer at the whims of colonizers, the oppressors, right?
Right.
And that's the story. That's the dominant narrative. It is not true. None of it's true. But the feeling of it is true because that's, it seems to me, what their intent has been, and that is to suppress the idea of identity, the idea of movement, the idea of equity, of ownership in the world. And so as I grew up, I learned to say that, whereas my block was my whole world when I was a kid, today, the whole world is my block.
Yes. Yeah.
Flip the script
Yeah.
because of technology and because of my interest and because of discovering my identity. I am able to connect with the me that is Cuban.
Right.
And I mentioned that in doing so, you discover that, we are sort of Americanized to the degree that we think that, the Black experience in America is all there is outside of Africa. We're not conscious of the fact that there are more of us in South America than there are of us here. That the largest populations of Black people are in Brazil, Colombia, the Caribbean. And so we developed this parochial attitude that really is a mirror of the oppressor's attitude, which minimalizes and marginalizes Black people wherever they are. So one of the things that Amilcar Priestley is talking about is that in Latin America, the playbook, the rule was to pretend that, white is the standard, Europe is the standard, everything else is subsidiary, subservient, at the margin.
Right.
And they wanted to induce loyalty to white supremacy, to Europeanized viewpoints, the same way North America has with Black people in this country. So what we have to do is recognize the game, say no to it, and say, you know what, I'm connected to Jamaica, I'm connected to Cuba, I'm connected to Brazil. One of the things then, so how does that lead to the discussion of Insight News?
Right.
We have a section in Insight we call Afrodescendientes. And it started off with us saying we should do something with Black and Afro-Latinos because there are a lot of Spanish-speaking people who are pretty much invisible, but they're here in Twin Cities. And when you think of Latinos in Twin Cities, you think, classically of Mexican Americans and some people from South America, but you don't think Black. And that's a bubble we have to burst so that Black people can be seen and that we can be ourselves as Latinos, be Latino and Black at the same time as Africans, as Africanos. And so we created the publication Afrodescendientes to run stories in both English and Spanish. And we thought about it, and one of my friends here, he's been on the show regularly, and that's Maestre Yoji Sena. He was here for 30 years in Twin Cities as a capoeira master, as an instructor. A lot of people know him, but he's moved back to Bahia in Brazil. And in Brazil, he and I are in talking. So he's joined me as an editor of the Afrodescendientes project. He said, Al, why don't you run the stories in Portuguese as well as in Spanish? Why not? Good idea. I like it. So we're presenting. And so after a couple of times presenting the story, see one story maybe, and we started off running a series of stories by a political activist, an Afro descendant, Cimarron, he calls himself, from Venezuela, a brother who's a former diplomat, educator, author, activist, revolutionary, I believe, uh, but by the name of Jesus Garcia, Chucho Garcia. And connected with him, he begins writing stories about the Africana experience in Central and South America.
Right.
Yogi translates those into Portuguese. And we say, well, what about all of the Black
Other,
people in here who speak French, Haiti?
right.
You know, what about the people from West Africa, Yoruba? Well, what about Minnesota, East Africa, Somalis, right? So
Right.
we end up creating this section of the paper that's one story, usually a fairly small story, 500 words or 750. That story is translated into, uh, starts in English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Somali, Yoruba, and a layout that tries to connect all of us. So we're doing something experimental here
Hmm.
and announcing to our people that we are each other wherever we are. And
Right.
we bring our languages, our understandings, our cultural context to bear in how we engage each other.
Right.
That's what Insight is about right now, is building the connection, showing our people uh, to our people and to the world in ways that defy the effort to marginalize, minimalize, and ignore our existence, our right, and our ability to be partners in the creation of futures in which we win.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
You know,
That's a
and,
lot.
and I think that's kind of interesting. And I guess because I grew up in New York, born and raised, and I think it's for me growing up, we grew up with, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, like, African, like, so it was, for us, it was a melting pot. I think maybe we might have had it maybe one white person, a white
Mhm.
kid in any of my school settings. And then when I went to Brazil when I was 17, and then just to kind of really realize that, yeah, there is so many more Black people who are outside, of the US. I think the appreciation is to have something like the Afro Descentia Days, who, you guys are putting together and really realizing that, we are a multilingual, multicultural. There's nothing monolithic about us,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I think that being able to push that narrative and get that narrative out and have a platform to be able to do that is so crucial. Especially when, you look at our young people, and even our old people, and even our middle-aged people, and realizing how much has been missed in the space of learning. So I think that having tools like this, and having and really being able to have kids and just people really realize that, we are, again, like you said, we're more together than we're not.
Mhm.
I just know that, like, it's just crazy because growing up in New York, that was the experience. That for us, that was the norm, right?
What,
I
what,
went to school in the South, and there
what,
wasn't the norm.
what did you discover living in Brazil? What was your experience there at 17, 18 years old?
Um, I think the basic experience was that I could actually go there as a Black young teen, and still really be able to fit in. Like,
Mhm.
it's like the US is such a melting pot. The other thing that I learned was that, um, it kind of further and further learned that, us as US citizens, we're extremely one-sided and almost on the level of conceit, right? Because we would go, when we were in Brazil, and my friends and I would kind of walk around and we're like, oh, we're Americans. We actually got challenged a lot of times because people are like, American, you do know that, you are in South America, right? So are you Norte Americano, or are you, New York, like, what, let's really
It's
drill down to the
cultural arrogance, right?
Exactly. So I think it helped me. Well, I mean, I'm New Yorker anyway, so we're always going to be arrogant. But I think it really kind of helped us really kind of tamper down that and appreciate the difference is, and appreciate how, there are some similarities, but there's also a level of, you have to appreciate other people's cultures and
Mhm.
what they're doing and what they're bringing to the table. So I think that was the biggest thing.
So one of my best Jamaica stories,
Hmm.
Yasmin, is the first time I went to Jamaica, I was maybe like 20 years old, or maybe 19, 20, I'm
Hmm.
not sure. And my dad and sister were already down there. I was flying down there and flew into Kingston, stayed a night at a cousin's house and then I was taking the country bus up to where we live up in the mountains, in the Blue Mountains, north or up from Ocho Rios.
Right.
And I discovered that I was like in town on a rush hour afternoon,
Right.
standing at a bus stop with about 50 more people. And it just hit me, as long as I keep my mouth shut,
They would never know.
I'm like everybody else on the street.
Yes.
And as long as I take a deep breath and relax, don't be uptight.
Yes.
Don't be scared, right?
Yes.
But if I walk around uptight and scared, I'd be broadcasting that I'm different from you, and I'd make myself a target for somebody who could perceive that. So that was one lesson. Another lesson is when Bobby, my wife, and I, when she first went to Jamaica, one thing we talked about was that so Bobby is from Crystal Springs, Mississippi. It's a small town south of Jackson. And when we're down there with her family, large family, a lot of people, sometimes we're sitting on her sister's porch, and across the street is a chicken pen, right? And people have hunting dogs around and cars. They have what they call shade tree mechanics. There's a shady tree, and a person taking the car completely apart, and building together. And you have, if a snake gets in the chicken coop, a cousin from next door comes out with a shotgun, kills the snake, and goes back home.
Wow.
Simple as that, right? So what I said to her was that, all the people here in Crystal Springs are just like all the people in Dresiki, in Miles Gully in Jamaica. And they are just like all the people I met in Accra, Ghana, the people I met in Cape Coast, Ghana. And they are just like the people I met in Uganda. And so what's the lesson? We're the same people everywhere on the planet, and we recognize each other, and we're all playing roles, and those roles end up creating and becoming community. And they can nurture us, they can protect us, they can harm us sometimes, depending on what the energy is. But that's the connection that I've experienced. I think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think that again, it's a matter of really going out there and being willing to come with an open mind. I think it's funny that you said that. Like when we went to Brazil, we stayed. We went to several different locations, but we actually stayed for a moment in Sao Paulo, in the city of Sao Paulo. And for me, it wasn't a culture shock, because it was like, wow, this city is very much like the city back home. You still had to watch where you were walking. You still had to be very aware of your surrounding, but you saw the mixture of people, right? And the people who, like, I oftentimes I was like, oh, that looks like my aunt, or that looks like my uncle or my cousin. And I think that's, again, that goes back to, this is the beauty, but it really being able to have platforms like Insight News that are going to really challenge that, but also bring in the connection of, just the world, the world, and how we are interconnected, all intertwined, just how we're just a part of something that's larger than ourselves. And I think that's really the biggest thing. Like, I know Yogi and I always talk, because he knows I haven't been to Bahia. I've been dying to go by Bahia. I heard it's beautiful. But yeah, we talk all the time, and it's crazy how someone who I've really never met in person, but he's from Brazil, and we're able to kind of connect on that level. So I think, we definitely need to continue these type of conversations, and I'm enjoying it and being part of this team. So I think I have to play producer now. So we actually have no time anymore. We have to wrap this up. So, Mr. Al, do you mind closing us out?
What a wonderful conversation. I'm Al McFarlane. Thank you for listening to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Yasmin.